So in the world, it seems that we are entering a point of crisis. And I'm not talking about the environment. I'm not talking about politically. I'm talking about the crisis that is inside each person. And this crisis is coming from a place of an exhaustion of extreme greed and selfishness. And so what's being reflected in the world is the political situations, the environmental situation. So directly that there is a recognition in the small infant of there being a mother, directly is there this energy that seems to appear of being here, of being a person. And out of that, along with societal and cultural conditioning, there arises this need to try and find fulfillment in life. And so there is this endless cycle of pain and pleasure, and the great need to stay in pleasure, to stay in which is good. And at some point comes pain, comes crisis, and then comes pleasure again. And so what seems to be happening through that for the person, there seems to be a process of either healing or becoming nearer to God, or over-analyzing oneself, or that one is seeking more and more and more extreme pleasurable situations. And we can see this through drug culture, through pornography, through the constant need to be special through social media, and this ever more increasing idea that everyone is a winner, everyone is an X Factor finalist, that everybody has to be somebody and achieve something and be seen and heard and known. But the privileged are the last to see through this, because the privileged are living in a dream of peace, of comfort. Privilege is not the same thing as peace. What this message is communicating is not the kind of peace that the world gives. It is a peace that is beyond what the world can give. I am not talking about a privileged peace of being middle or upper class and avoiding that which is uncomfortable. I am talking about a peace that passes all understanding. It's like a fire that does not burn out. What the self is doing is it's living by a fire that will burn out. The majority of the privileged and wealthy in the Western world are living on the fruits and the labor of our ancestors, and they are putting nothing back in. This is not sustainable, not just for the planet, but it is not sustainable in this seeking energy of the person. And so, globally, we are facing crisis. And in the coming decades, we will face environmental and political crisis, whether it's global warming or global cooling. There seems to be differing viewpoints on that and differing evidences. We've got the rise of the far left and the rise of the far right. And so all we're going to have is conflict, because this selfish, greedy energy, which is the me, the apparent me, is looking for pleasure at any cost. And this is being perpetuated in our culture, in our society, to experience as much as you can, to get as much as you can while you are alive. This is a very greedy, selfish, overindulgent energy that is manifesting as crisis within the individual and in the world, apparently. All this is apparent. And so where the liberation is not in a contented, comfortable, over-nurtured, over-mothered sense of false peace, of privilege. It is in the place, which is not a place really, but it is in the place where it is uncomfortable. When you are privileged, living in a false sense of peace, and you are in the present moment and everything is wonderful, then you are avoiding the place that will eventually come to you one way or another, that will not be peace as the world gives, that will not be comfortable. So this uncomfortable emptiness that is not filled up with a privileged life, safe, is where you become lost in God. And that which is lost is found. This is where you see God. You do not see God in greed, in overindulgence, privileged, false peace. That's a peace that will also become restlessness at some point. People are living by temporary pleasures. They are building their foundations on sand because they're so terrified to face the emptiness, to face the big hole that's inside every single being that is seeking. So this is a place to ask questions. So I'm not here as a messenger to nurture you into a false sense of peace, into enjoying every moment and being present and being peaceful and full of gratitude for that which was so freely given to you. In this Western world, we are living in a privilege that has been so freely given to us. And that which is given so freely can be taken away. So I am not talking about a kind of peace that is based on a worldly peace. This is why we've got extremism in the world, why we've got bombs and guns going off, and things being set fire to, and people doing crazy things. It's because we have come to a place of crisis. So we have based our peace on worldly peace. There's no point blaming the leaders. They will do what they do. This is in each individual. And if you have come to this message and you are sitting and listening to this now, there is something that is calling you out of that worldly peace. And there is great suffering. Worldly peace no longer suffices. And that's when you see God. That's when you see life as it is, wholeness, the kingdom of heaven. I'm not saying that you shouldn't enjoy life. When there is pleasure, it's fully enjoyed. It's fully felt. It's beautiful. Right now it's beautiful. The sound of birds. It's spring. It's very warm here. But long will come weather that is not like this. So if you base your happiness on the weather, you will always be like the weather. And if you're privileged enough, you can travel around the world always chasing the sun and never feeling the cold. But at some point, illness or something will make you stay where it's cold and you'll have to feel the cold. And it's the same with life. If you are constantly staying in safety and a false sense of peace that's based on what others give you, and which is based on what your ancestors toiled for so that you may live in this world that we live in now, is based on what our ancestors toiled for. We sit here so privileged, communicating through the internet right now. Our ancestors toiled to get to a place where electric and all of the things that make this possible could be invented and manifest. And we take it so for granted. And we live in that dream of that peace, of that comfort. But I tell you, crisis is coming. It's obvious to see. And it will manifest in this world. It's already manifesting. So you have to be prepared. And I don't mean storing food underground, etc., although that could be good. But I mean that if you are very much basing your peace on a false sense of peace and privilege, you will not be ready to face crisis when it comes. Hi, Riving Yacht. Hi, Ida. Ida says, "My love, thank you for the wisdom you share." Well, wisdom comes from seeing. It comes from seeing clearly and seeing the obviousness of what is, and it comes through challenge and hardship and struggle. When life makes you different, you stand out. You're not the same as other people. I always feel as though God plucked me out from the masses and he made me different. And a lot of people see this as that as being special. And it's not special in that sense. It's that the beloved, I'm being very poetical here, but I don't know how to express it in any other way. The beloved plucked me out and he made me different, and I cannot be the same as other people. My life path is very different from other people. And so in that, there is a clear seeing that other people cannot see. And I'm not talking just about non-duality. I'm talking about seeing what is happening in this apparent world. Hi, Fabrizio. Peter says, I leave the talking to the birds. You know, the kingdom of heaven is like those birds. Whether we're talking or not, they're still singing. This peace that I talk about is not in books. It's not in satsangs. It's not in masters. It's not in Lamborghinis or in the perfect girl or man. It is not in riches. It is not in beauty. It is not even in these words. It's in that which the words point to. It is not as this world gives peace. Hi, Om Sadhana. This is how religions and cults are formed, because along comes somebody who sees clearly, who sees the kingdom of heaven, and they talk about it, and only a fraction of those that listen really hear the message. And the rest, they go and make a whole religion about it. Fabrizio says, Ella, in your experience, can you say that liberation is the end of the dialogue? Liberation is when no one is noticing there's a dialogue anymore. And it's also sometimes noticed, but it doesn't matter anymore. Liberation is when there is no longer anyone that feels they have an inner dialogue, whether there is an inner dialogue or not. Is liberation the end of the sun shining? Or is it when there is a child happily playing under the sun that does not even think about the sun? Is liberation the end of those birds singing? Or is it when no one's really noticing, there's just the beauty of it? Is liberation when the river stops running, when the clouds stop moving across the sky? Is liberation when one goes blind, when one cuts off their hands to no longer feel? So how could liberation be the end of neuro-linguistic processing? At some point, somebody in time has spoken about how when there is liberation, there is a quiet mind. And so what's happened is people have thought, I have to quiet my mind to be liberated. That's where that comes from. And so out of that, we have meditation and all of those things that involves a person still trying to get something. It's another form of trying to acquire something for themselves. The kingdom of heaven does not belong to those who practice trying to be in the kingdom of heaven. It's not bought and paid for. Most spiritual teachers that you see these days have bought and paid for experiences with bought and paid for masters. It does not come from life experience of going through suffering, facing the emptiness and meeting God that way. It comes from an acquisition of more concepts and ideas and a false sense of privilege, peace. Fabrizio, so the silent mind after liberation is a myth. Why do you think that this is about the mind? Where did you get this idea from, that this is about the mind? If someone asks me, is my mind silent? I would say I do not know, because I am not in the mind. A silent mind is brain dead. Do you need to cut off the hand in order to be liberated? Why would you need to cut off the mind? Why would you need to kill what the mind does? This is like saying, if I cut off the trunk of the tree, then I will finally have fruit. Expansion does not come from cutting back. Expansion does not come from dissection. which is dualistic. The me, the apparent me, lives in a world of thought, because that's where it dwells, in here. And so it becomes obsessed with thought. And because all it has is thought, it thinks it's about thought. But that which you really are is the soul. And the soul dwells in the heart. The mind is just a wonderful functioning survival tool for this flesh and blood body. That's all it is. Fabrizio, what is the dark night of the soul for you? It happened in the early stage of the journey, or it can happen even after a big glimpse. The dark night of the soul, I would say, is when one comes to a place in life where there is no longer anything of the world that will suffice the individual. And because it does not see, it looks, but it does not see the kingdom of heaven, then it feels that it is in darkness. And so it feels as though there is just stillness and emptiness and nothing in the world that will suffice. There is no pleasure, there is no message, there is no teacher or path or religion or experience on any level anymore that will suffice. And so, even though there seems to be not so much of a person, there is still the feeling of being alone and in darkness. And that can happen even after a glimpse, because a glimpse is a glimpse of heaven. And so, because a glimpse of heaven is something that comes and goes, then the person is still depending on whether it sees heaven, sees God or not. But every glance of the eye is a seeing of heaven. Om Sadhana. Is it fair to say that the practice of meditation is more conducive to the masculine? Don't know where that came from, perhaps I don't know. Maybe because men have been taught not to feel, even though they're just as sensitive as women. They've been taught not to feel, so men are more likely to seek within the mind. Probably so. This message seems to come across in a very intellectual way when it's spoken through a man these days. But if you look at the writings of San Francesco of Assisi, St. Francis of Assisi, and some of the writings of Jesus, especially in the Gospel of Thomas, and the poems of Rumi and Hafiz, then you will see that actually it's very heart-centered, not mind-centered. And that's important because the mind cannot grasp this. Hi, Suchitha. Hi, Ella. Greetings and much love from India. Thank you, and to you too. And I wish to say to everyone, Happy Easter. Beppe. The truth is one, so what's the point to make these distinctions? I'm not making any distinctions. And I don't know what you mean by the truth is one. What does it mean, the truth is one? Who would know that? When I speak about things, it may seem to you like it's making a distinction, but it's not. It's pointing to something which is beyond distinctions or oneness or any idea of non-duality. Non-duality doesn't exist. One doesn't exist because there cannot be one when there is not two. But there appears to be duality. There appears to be duality. Fabrizio, it's weird to say this, but I'm sometimes scared that liberation would happen in a sudden way. Maybe because the glimpse that I had was kind of near-death experience, beautiful and traumatic. It is beautiful and traumatic. And it could happen in a sudden way, but it will not be an event or a happening. But liberation is only scary to the individual. There is absolutely nothing to fear at all, in reality. But it won't happen to you, Fabrizio. So, Fabrizio, this thing is not an event. It scares me even more. Even the glimpse was not an event in this sense because I was not in that moment. So how will you know that there's liberation unless the person comes back to claim it? And then that would be a false liberation. When there is no longer the appearance of an apparent individual, No one would know that they are liberated. That's why the kingdom of heaven is like the most beautiful wife that lay with a man all her life, but he is blind. He is blind. Fabrizio. Can a glimpse be considered as Kundalini awakening and liberation the end of the Kundalini journey? I have no idea about such Kundalini ideas. Liberation is not a journey, it's not a point of arrival. The kingdom of heaven is both inside and outside. Look with wonder at that which is before you, and you will see. The kingdom of heaven is not an event. It's not a day where people will say, now is the kingdom, now is coming the kingdom, here is the kingdom, now I have finally reached the kingdom. The kingdom of heaven is what already is. If you have eyes to see, you will see. Mr. Bear, what's the name of your god, Miss Host? Mr. Bear. I don't have a god. God has me. Hi, SS. Do you mean there is crisis coming up in the world? There's a lot now already. You might need to watch the beginning of the talk to get a more clearer answer, because I know that I've already said things about it. But there is a crisis with the individual because it's exhausting its greed. And so that's also manifesting in the world. Fabrizio, sometimes I ask God why I decided to give me a taste of heaven and then pull me back, so that you may yearn for the taste of it again. Mr. Bear, you're talking about kingdom a while ago. So who's the king? The beloved. You could also say it's a queendom, but it's also my queendom, in a sense, because when you can see the kingdom of heaven, you are seeing through the eyes of God. Who is the beloved? Look with wonder at that which is before you. If you want to see the beloved, and you want to know who the beloved is, you must look with the eyes of a child, from the heart. SS, thank you, Ella, for the beautiful words always. You're welcome, darling. Okay, thank you everybody for joining me, and thank you to everyone that supports me. May peace be with you always. Ciao, amore.